Welcome back to my series of videos on games that time has forgotten. If you are new to the channel, welcome. If you are a subscriber, welcome back. This month, Magician Lord for the Neo Geo. The Neo Geo arcade cabinet was a thing of beauty when it was first introduced to the scene in 1990. It was a cabinet that housed 3, sometimes 4 games at once, although the board could hold up to 6. Some of those first titles were not the best, but they were loud. They had these crazy scrolling and zooming sprites and they were very colorful. And then there was Magician Lord. Now I first played this game in the arcades and I was immediately hooked. But first, let's go over the details. First, most people out there think that this game was made by SNK, but it was not. As you can see here on the title screen, the developer was Alpha Denshi. Some notable titles before 1990 would be Gang Wars and Time Soldiers. Magician Lord was one of the first titles released for the new Neo Geo MVS and would also be used as a pack-in title for the Neo Geo AES home platform. It was released in April of 1990. It came in on a whopping 46 megabit cart, which is about 5.75 megabytes. To give you an idea for comparison, Phantasy Star 2, released in 1989, boasted of being a 6 megabit cart, which came to just under a megabyte. Even looking back now, this game is quite an impressive achievement considering it comes close to or just over the size of a music MP3 file. It utilized various scrolling-like effects and had very vibrant and colorful graphics that quickly stood out among other arcade titles of the time. It also had a very good and very deep soundtrack that felt almost orchestrated. The story, for those out there that are not familiar with this game, is as follows. Centuries ago, the evil sorcerer Gal Agis, I guess is how you pronounce it, was imprisoned using 8 magical tomes by a young and mysterious wizard, whom legends would call the Magician Lord. However, centuries pass and he manages to break free and steal the 8 tomes, while at the same time trying to resurrect the god of destruction, As-Ators? That doesn't sound right. The descendant of the Magician Lord, named Elta, embarks on a journey to retrieve the tomes and either seal Gal again or kill him before he revives the god of destruction. The game has a total of 8 levels. Each level is unique in looks and has some unique enemies as well. The overall look of the game is that of a fantasy world that is quite versed in locations. You will travel from temples, through mines, and eventually through a castle that is only accessible through a dimensional passageway. Along the way, you're going to find these magical orbs that will allow you to change your form, allowing you to use different abilities with each one. You initially have the ability to fire magic-like projectiles in 4 directions. You start off with 2 health points out of 4 max, and it maxes out when you collect an orb to change to a new form. You can also power up your shots, which is accounted for by this meter right here at the bottom. There are 6 different forms that you can change into. The first one you will find is the Dragon Warrior. He's a bit slow and his fire range is short to begin with, but he does have the ability to slowly move up and down as you hold down the action button, and has an 8-way directional trajectory. One of the coolest looking forms in the game, but not fully effective due to his slow movement. The Ninja is the second form that you're going to come upon. The cool thing about the Ninja, other than the fact that he's a ninja, is that he has a projectile attack, but the problem is they're very slow. But while his projectiles are slow, they cover a pretty large area in their path. The next form I found was the Raijin. It is one of the most odd of the forms that you can change into, with a weapon that matches. Now, for those out there that might not be aware, a Raijin is a god of thunder and lightning in Japanese mythology. Yet here, they go with a robotic-like humanoid figure, which is odd.
I'm destined but to die.
He is one of the trickiest forms to use since he has no projectile weapons, but rather a sphere-like lightning charge that hits anything it touches. This circle of aura will stay on as long as you keep the action button pressed, and this even includes if you jump, making him almost impervious to harm. But it does not deflect enemy fire. He is also extremely agile, so caution needs to be taken when you control him, since you are more likely to touch or run into an enemy before anything else. I have never gotten used to this form and will usually change to another or lose it before I can proceed deeper into the level. The Samurai is supposedly one of the strongest forms to use. The cool thing is with him, his projectile weapon will traverse walls and any object in front, allowing you to hit enemies from far as long as you can take cover behind something. His movement is slow, but his jump is actually quite good, and his weapon attack is very strong. The Waterman is one of my least favorite. He basically throws a water attack that hits the floor and continues to hit for a good amount of damage, but is so limited in range that by the time you use it properly, you're gonna probably take a hit or two. Poseidon is basically an upgraded form to the Waterman. Instead of throwing these small water attacks, Poseidon summons a small wave-like attack that travels through the ground, causing a great deal of damage. But again, this offensive power comes at a cost. Poseidon moves extremely slow, and every time I collect him as a form to use, it lasts only a few seconds before I lose him quickly due to the much faster moving enemies. As far as Elta goes, he moves slowly when compared to most enemies in the game, initially only being able to take 2 hits before losing a life. You can collect power-ups that extend your health and augment your magic attacks. The good thing is that if you're low on health and manage to collect one of the orbs to transform you to another form, your health is automatically filled up again, and at that point you technically have 4 health points, 2 of them with the new form and 2 with the regular form. The levels on this game are some of my favorite from that era. When you start the game, you are dropped off at the beginning of some temple. While the area alone is not long or vast in scope, it manages to grab your attention with the amount of colors and background details that bring the world alive. The floating pillars in the background alongside those lush mountains give this level a sense of depth that most games of that era had a hard time doing. The level is not too long, which some might say it's a good thing. Personally, I would have been happy had it been a little bit longer, since the artwork and designs leave you wanting to see more of this world. On this level, you immediately are introduced to the gameplay that this title has in store for you. There are drop-down hazards, small pits, and enemies who will attack you from the top or bottom as you ascend or descend to some parts. Next is that there is a mid-boss, something that every level will have after this one. You fight the mid-boss right before the main boss, which I guess would not make it a mid-boss, but rather a mini sub-boss? Regardless, these tricky bosses are just there to make sure that you take a few hits before you proceed to the main boss of the level. After you beat the sub-boss, you get to meet Gal, a geese. Am I pronouncing that right?
What imprudence, you human being! Face your trial by God.
And what stood out for me in that time was his speech, and how it wasn't restricted to just 1 or 2 words. I mean, this guy right here, he spoke full sentences. You have to remember, back then this was something that was unique to only a small amount of arcades of that time. Speech in games was a huge deal back then, believe it or not. His lines, as the game progresses though, they get a little bit more and more odd, and I'm gonna get to those shortly. Once he's done talking, you start the battle with the stage boss. The main boss of this level is inside some kind of a tower room that seems to be spinning as you battle it out. I know it's supposed to be clouds out there, but it makes it look like the tower is spinning. Second level has one of the best names in all of gaming lore, the Evil Mines. Short, to the point, and evil. This is the first stage when you're gonna see doorways and rooms that will lead to some power-ups and some to dead ends. It is one of my favorite levels in the game because each section is different from the other, starting with the outside and seeing the huge moon in the background if you happen to travel all the way up. You eventually travel to the inside part of the mine, all the way to this part right here where you ascend via some magical looking floor disc. This area also has some hidden sections which house some power-ups and your first look at the samurai form. The sub-boss is a pain in the ass since he moves very quickly.
I'm destined just to die.
The boss of this stage is one of the least memorable of them all. The third stage is called Highway Leading to a Foreign Space. This level is the interdimensional passage that will allow you to access the Demon Castle. The stage music here is one of the most haunting and eerie of the entire lineup, which goes perfectly with the almost surreal enemies and background atmosphere. The stage will really test your platforming and overall jumping skills, and enemies will slowly approach you from all sides and past your view of the screen, making this one tricky. This is the level I had the hardest time when I used to play it in the arcades and at home. The sub-boss and the main boss are both interesting in design, with the main boss being one of the most interesting in the entire game. The next stage is titled Castle of Devils, which is the entrance to the overall main castle where Gal awaits. This whole stage is just a maze of doors and passages, and the enemies come at you slow, but are positioned in a way that's going to cause you a lot of headaches. If you are at least powered up to level 2, these fishes will be easy to dispose of. Next stage is the Underground Passage of Terror. This is where the difficulty of the game ramps up by, 1,000%. The whole level is a mess of doors, each leading to other rooms and tons of enemies. On top of all that, there are many pits and ladders that leave you open to attack from all sides. The frogs in the stage are what make this level just a living freaking nightmare. I hate these frogs, I really do. This is where you hit that point in the game that many others have done so as well. The onslaught and 2 health points will lead to quick deaths over and over and over again. Some might find this as a challenge, and some might find it as a nuisance that may cause most to give up and walk away. I never got past this part when I owned the game on the AES. It had checkpoints, and if I recalled correctly, limited continues. If you happen to make it past the damn frogs, you end up in Corridor Leading to Hell. This stage is a bit easier than the last, especially since there are no frogmen here, thank goodness. But the Catwomen enemies are no slouches. The level takes place inside a tower or castle of some type that appears to be in shambles as you progress. Eventually, you're going to be entering some passages that you will need to navigate before arriving to the sub-boss. Next stage is Gal Agace. Again, probably mispronouncing that. This is technically the last scrolling level of the game. You enter the tower where the main boss with bad English dialogue resides. The beginning of the stage took me around 30 tries before I was able to proceed. Enemy placement here is always a huge challenge in and of itself.
Yes, I made a mistake, but the fight is yet to finish. My spirit never dies.
The last stage of the game is just a boss rush mode, as you encounter all the sub-bosses again, one by one, and then you change screens to meet up with the God of Destruction himself. This game was a great showcase of what the Neo Geo could do when it arrived in the arcades. There was lots of scrolling and rotating tricks and even a good amount of clean voice work done. The game is a blast to play through the first 4 stages before it drops a huge difficulty wall on you with stage number 5. That is a shame, since the game up to that point I felt went out of its way to pull you in with some amazing music, graphical tricks, and stages that placed you inside a realm that felt truly fantastic. As I stated earlier, the AES version had limited continues and checkpoints, making the game extremely brutal either in the arcade or at home. The MVS port had no checkpoints, but you would have to pump into it tons of quarters as you get past some parts of the game that became unbearable to play through. The AES gave you 1 extra hit point as well, starting you off with 3 out of 6 bars versus 2 out of 4 in the arcade. But that barely made a difference in the long run. If I had spent money in getting through this game as I captured video for it, I probably would have spent around $25, maybe $30. Now imagine doing that back in the 1990s as a kid with limited quarters at your disposal. I think this is one of those arcade titles that most gamers wanted to play but were afraid to. Aside from the health and checkpoints on the AES, it also gave you an intro not seen in the MVS, although later on, the ROM set for the MVS was ported to late AES cartridges. If that is true, I would have been able to beat the game at home, assuming it had unlimited continues, of course. Now, if the difficulty alone wasn't bad, there was also a timer on the stages, meaning if you took a really long time in one area or just to progress through, a large tentacle-like creature appears from the top of the screen and just proceeds to come down slowly and kill you. There is no way to defeat it, and I've read online that if he appears to you during a boss battle, he will not disappear but instead continue to kill you until you beat the boss in some miraculous fashion, or at that point, if you cannot, you just have to restart the game. Now thankfully I never had the pleasure of being in that situation, but if it is true, damn, this game really hates you as a gamer. One thing I did find out while making this video was that there is a double jump feature that you can perform as Elta and 2 other specific forms, the ninja and the waterman. I thought it was fake until I tried it out, and it works. It actually works, but it took me a really long time to pull it off, and even then, the timing is so precise and tricky that I find the feature to be almost useless when playing the game, but it does work. There were plans for a sequel on the AES, but it was cancelled, unfortunately. When the Neo Geo Pocket Color was released, a sequel to the game titled just Magician Lord was developed for it. Unfortunately, the game was also cancelled, and that's a shame because it looks like it allowed you to change to many different types of creatures and other fighting forms. The title would have used gameplay similar to that found in a Metroid or Castlevania Symphony of the Night game. This is another great title that was ultimately forgotten, and we never got any sort of sequel or even a spiritual successor of any type. Alpha Denshi unfortunately went out of business, so if SNK still owns the rights to it, hopefully they can lend out that license to a developer out there to revisit this fantasy world one more time, minus the damn frogmen. Did you happen to play this game in the arcades or maybe on AES? What do you think about it? Is it as difficult as many say it is? It is. Should we get some sort of a sequel? Share with us your stories. Remember, I also have a Reddit forum for this channel where we can discuss this game right here as well as any other gaming topic you would like. Until next video, keep watching, keep gaming, and as always, take care of yourselves.
You persistent guy, but your life ends right now.